time for a revolution in the Middle East. The problem with that is that belies the fact that actually the best transitions towards democracy do not require people having a violent rebellion, that the best and most stable democracies come after good long-term economic development. So we're going to build on this short economic analysis we got from our opening team and show you where that economic development was going, how that was actually a better transition to democracy in this debate, and how the rebellion has set that development towards democracy as an endpoint back. First of all, though, let's look at the long game that Open Up wanted to play. Because they said, well, it's going to take a while, at least have a vote now, and then we can go from there. That vote is absolutely meaningless to these people, right? They're still facing the same repression, they're still facing the same dire economic situation that they were facing before this revolution, and having a vote means nothing to them. But what this does now is now they have no faith in what that vote meant, because that democracy was their saviour, and it has let them down. So that is why a premature revolution, or even premature democratisation, is a bad thing, just to speak up. What we heard is that, we need to get opposition, but the problem is, and something we're going to show in extension, is that when there is no good economy, and there is no, good spread of wealth that does happen as the economy starts to develop, then actually everyone has an incentive not to allow opposition, right? Because now, you need to maintain power because there is a fight for very limited resources. This is what Gemma's point of information to stand, is that everyone now needs to just be the next dictator, because you need to be the guy that controls those very finite resources that exist in that country. Once the pie is bigger, then you don't need to fight life and death to hold the entire thing. Yeah, I'm not count the other one. Anyway, moving on to economics. We believe that the entire revolution that began actually came from economics in the first place, right? That was the thing that mostly pushed people. We heard from our opening that there was discussion, particularly amongst the middle class and academics, about democracy and the importance of political rights. But the vast majority of people that engaged in this revolution were not the educated middle class of Egypt and Tunisia and Libya and Yemen. They were those that were suffering from relative and absolute deprivation. The reason why they hated these governments so much was because they could not even feed their families, Mr. Speaker, because that meant they had no access to any sort of right or any sort of benefit in their life. Even those that were politically motivated, that was because, due to political motivations, political divisions, there was economic repression as well. So that meant they could not access any sort of quality of life. We think that they were right to preference the economy over political rights, because we believe that economic development is a very good precursor to a lot of those political rights and to legitimate political engagement, be that democracy or something else. We've went to various countries in Africa, such as Botswana, that have had strong economies, that have built their economies, and they have stayed as stable democracies. No, thank you, Kiran. Gemma told me, it must be true. Whereas those that have had vast revolutions have been more likely to not have a stable government and to have the continued repression of minority groups even after they have the pseudo-democracy that they moved to. No, thank you. Why are these economic rights a precursor to democratic rights and a functioning democracy? Because the only way that democracy works is where the government has to be responsible to the people, and that means they need to have a shared interest. And the economy is the best of those shared interests, right? We think that the idea of no taxation without representation comes from this symbiotic relationship that this develops. Because we think that once the government is dependent on taxation from the people, they need to then give political concessions to the people. They need to be responsive to the people, they need to listen to them, and that makes it far more likely that they're going to represent the interests of the population. I'll take Eleanor.
In the most wealthy countries that are subject to the Arab Spring, like Saudi Arabia, that wealth didn't lead to more democratisation. It just led to that government buying off people that would otherwise oppose them.
Yeah, the problem with your model is that because you don't have a good economic development of the lower classes, that has meant that in countries like Egypt, the rich have still been able to buy off elections, right? They've still been able to buy support in those countries. So you've just exacerbated that wealth disparity that already exists in those countries and given more power because there's now a power vacuum and money speaks louder in these because there's that level of deprivation. If other people were closer to the middle class, they're less likely to be able to be bribed, they're less likely to need to be bribed and accept bribes in return for votes and things like that. We think that money has less power when you don't have the huge levels of relative deprivation that exists there. So, why does money enable some form of political engagement? Because apart from just the ability to be educated and vote, make all those meaningful things, it also gives you legitimate things that you can do to harm your government. So when you have some money, you have things like mobility. You can say that the Egyptian government isn't doing what you want, and you take your company or whatever you do offshore, and you no longer contribute taxation, you no longer contribute to that government. So the government has to actually start listening to the population as a vast majority. So why did the revolution not achieve this and in fact set it back? We've heard from our opening a good discussion about how it destabilised a lot of these countries and set back development and investment in these countries. But the other problem is that it took the focus off this economic development in the first place. because it became inherently about politics, because that was what the West could sell. And so when the West was going to go and back people, they went in there under this banner of democracy, that we're democratizing the Middle East. So now the primary focus wasn't on what the people actually wanted themselves, it was on trying to get as close as possible to an American-style democracy that they could then sell to their voters back home, Mr. Speaker. So even to the extent that it was about politics, that was never the short-term goal, but that has been hijacked. And it is not the same buying that is necessary. It sets back that goodwill that the opening audition talked about for democracy because it didn't solve their problems. No, thank you. So how did it set back that goal, that secondary goal of political rights? First of all, because of economic prerequisites didn't exist. So it means that we've just re-entrenched those existing power failures. It means that we've just meant that the rich can still get more and more power. Secondly, it's increased divisions, no thank you, in these countries between these sorts of the sectarian groups, but also it's increased division from these groups to the West because they think that the West has harmed us. When they say that we can give them aid, they don't think that they want to engage the West. In fact, when we look at countries like Syria, they would rather take money from Al-Qaeda at the moment than they would take money from the West. So if this has shut off their willingness to get aid, and it's set back this political goal, because it's also led to more repression. So we point to Bahrain, the most failed of all the revolutions, where the immediate response of Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the UAE was to try and establish a united Gulf state, to try and oppress the Shia majority in Bahrain even further, because they wanted to control as much money that came out of there as possible. Would we have gotten there without the Arab Spring? Well, that's pretty much been said by everyone, right? Because everyone said we were on this wonderful path, but that was coming from the economic development that these countries were seeing. Because that was bringing people together and it meant that the differences didn't matter. The people were no longer fighting as much as they used to over the very limited resources necessary for their survival. So the problem is that now they need to win that first election absolutely. If you didn't have the Arab Spring, they didn't need to win that because it wasn't a matter of all or nothing we propose.